On a humid evening in May, a social worker sat on a linoleum floor with a 4-year-old boy named Leo. Just 24 hours earlier, Leo's world had ended when his mother was found murdered in their quiet suburban kitchen. The police were desperate. They believed Leo was the only one who saw the face of the killer. After minutes of heavy silence, Leo whispered a single name that would send an innocent man to death row and allow a predator to walk free. But the truth wasn't hidden in a confession or a forensic lab. It was waiting in a dusty file at the local DMV. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support means the world and helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Stick with us until the end. And if this mystery moves you, share your thoughts in the comments and pass it along to a friend. On a humid evening in May, a social worker sat on a linoleum floor with a 4-year-old boy named Leo. Just 24 hours earlier, Leo's world had ended when his mother was found murdered in their quiet suburban kitchen. The police were desperate. They believed Leo was the only one who saw the face of the killer. After minutes of heavy silence, Leo whispered a single name that would send an innocent man to death row and allow a predator to walk free. But the truth wasn't hidden in a confession or a forensic lab. It was waiting in a dusty file at the local DMV. The scene in that kitchen in Pascagoula, Ohio, was the kind of thing that stays with a first responder for a lifetime. Maya Vance had been a pillar of her neighborhood, a woman who balanced 3 jobs and still found time to bake cookies for the local school drive. When her body was discovered, the air in the house was still warm, smelling faintly of the pasta sauce she had been simmering for dinner. The only sound in the house was the rhythmic ticking of a wall clock and the soft, rhythmic breathing of little Leo, who was found huddled under the dining room table, clutching a tattered blue teddy bear. Detective Miller, a man with 20 years on the force and a face like a crumpled paper bag, stood over the scene. He wasn't looking for high-tech clues yet. He was looking at the injustice of it all. Maya hadn't just been killed. She had been erased. The front door showed no signs of forced entry, suggesting she knew her killer. Or at least, she felt safe enough to let them in. The detective watched as the social worker, a woman named Sarah with infinite patience, knelt beside Leo. She didn't ask him who did it. She just asked if anyone else had been there to play. Leo's small voice cracked the silence. "Uncle Marcus," he whispered. He said it with the kind of certainty only a child possesses. To the police, this was the golden ticket. Marcus Robinson was Maya's brother-in-law, a man who had struggled with a gambling addiction and had a history of loud public arguments with Maya over money. He was the perfect suspect. He was the underdog who had finally snapped. Within 2 hours, Marcus was in a windowless room at the precinct, staring at a cold cup of coffee and the sharp fluorescent lights that made his eyes ache. Marcus didn't understand why he was there. He kept asking about Leo, his voice thick with genuine concern. He moved his hands nervously, picking at a loose thread on his jacket, a tiny micro-movement that the detectives interpreted as guilt. They didn't see a grieving uncle. They saw a predator trying to act. They played the good cop, bad cop routine with practiced precision. They told him they knew he was there. They told him Leo had seen him. They lied and said they had his fingerprints on the knife. The interrogation lasted 10 hours. Marcus was exhausted, dehydrated, and emotionally shattered by the news of Maya's death. The detectives used the Reed technique, a psychological hammer designed to break the will of the innocent and guilty alike. They offered him a way out. If he just admitted it was an accident, a heated argument that went too far, they could help him. They suggested he was blacked out from stress. Eventually, the human brain does something strange under that kind of pressure. It starts to prioritize the end of the pain over the truth. Marcus, weeping and barely able to stand, mumbled the words they wanted to hear. "I guess I must have done it," he sobbed. By the next morning, the town of Pascagoula was buzzing. The gossip at the local diner was vicious. People who had known Marcus for years were suddenly experts on his dark side. They talked about his debts and his temper, layering on years of small, insignificant incidents to build a monster. The injustice was complete. Marcus was charged with first-degree murder, and the case was practically closed before the autopsy report was even finished. But while the town was sharpening its pitchforks, Marcus's sister, Clara, refused to buy the narrative. She knew her brother. He was a mess, sure, but he wasn't a killer. He adored Leo. She took out a second mortgage on her house and hired Matt Sauer, a private investigator known for finding the things the police missed. Sauer was a man who didn't care about confessions. He cared about the clock. He moved with a slow, deliberate energy, like a predator tracking a scent. Sauer's first stop wasn't the police station. It was Maya's kitchen. He stood exactly where the body had been found, looking at the layout of the room. He noticed something small. A kitchen timer sat on the counter, stopped at 3 minutes. He looked at the crime scene photos and realized the pasta sauce hadn't just been simmering. It had been burning. This meant the struggle happened much earlier than the police timeline suggested. Even if the murder happened at 5 p.m., Marcus had a problem. He claimed he was at a gas station 3 miles away at that exact time. The police had dismissed the gas station alibi because Marcus didn't have a receipt. But Sauer knew that in a small town, people notice things. He went to the station and talked to the clerk, a teenager who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The kid remembered a guy in a beat-up truck complaining about the price of air for his tires. He remembered it because the guy had dropped a handful of change and spent 5 minutes crawling around on the pavement to find a stray quarter. Sauer checked the station's security footage. The timestamp was clear. 5:02 p.m. Marcus was 3 miles away, crawling on his knees for 25 cents, while Maya was fighting for her life. The curiosity loop began to tighten. Or if Marcus didn't do it, why did Leo name him? Sauer went back to the house and sat in the backyard, watching the neighborhood. He saw the way the kids played in the street. He realized that Uncle Marcus wasn't just a name, it was a safety net. When Leo was scared, he didn't call for the police. He called for the person who made him feel safe. The child wasn't naming the killer. He was naming the person he wished was there to save them. The detectives had taken a cry for help and turned it into an accusation. Sauer felt the weight of the injustice pulling at him. He knew he had the timeline, but he needed the real killer. He started looking into Maya's past, looking for anyone else who might have a reason to be in that kitchen. He found a trail of missing jewelry and a car that had vanished from the driveway, a detail the police had overlooked in their rush to pin it on Marcus. Maya's blue Cadillac was gone. The neighbor, an elderly woman who spent her days behind lace curtains, mentioned seeing a car like that tearing off down the road, but she hadn't seen the driver's face. The pacing of the investigation slowed as Sauer hit a wall. He spent days tracing the missing jewelry to local pawnshops but found nothing. It was as if the killer had vanished into the ether. He sat in his car, staring at the local DMV building, frustrated and exhausted. He watched the people going in and out, clutching their little numbered tickets, waiting for their turn to be seen. He thought about the blue Cadillac. It was a distinctive car. If it hadn't been pawned, it had to be somewhere. Suddenly, a thought struck him. A car like that is a liability. You can't just drive it around Pascala. You have to move it. You have to sell it. And if you sell it, you leave a trail. He realized the police hadn't checked the recent title transfers for that specific model in the surrounding counties. They were so focused on Marcus's confession that they hadn't even filed the car as stolen. It was a classic case of tunnel vision, a failure of the system that was now keeping an innocent man in a cage. Sauer walked into the DMV, not to renew his license but to find a ghost. He used his connections to get a look at the recent filings. He was looking for a blue Cadillac, sold for cash, in the days immediately following the murder. He found it. A 1998 Cadillac DeVille, sold on May 1st to a woman in Columbus. The seller's name on the document was handwritten in a shaky, hurried scrawl. It wasn't Marcus Robinson. It was a name that Sauer recognized from Maya's old phone records. A man named Chris Williams. The revelation landed with a physical punch. Chris Williams was a former bandmate of Maya's ex-husband. He had a history of drug use and had been recently released from a halfway house. He was exactly the kind of person Maya might have let into her house, thinking he needed help. Sauer felt the momentum shift. He had the car, he had the name, and he had the motive. He just needed the evidence to tie Williams to the kitchen. He drove to Columbus to find the woman who bought the car. When he arrived, the blue Cadillac was sitting in her driveway looking neglected. He talked to her, and she admitted the guy who sold it to her seemed wired, like he was looking for his next fix. He had left a bag in the trunk and told her to throw it away. She hadn't gotten around to it yet. Sauer's heart raced as she opened the trunk. Inside was a small floral print purse. Maya's purse. The injustice was finally being unraveled, one piece of paperwork at a time. Sauer knew he had enough to go back to the police, but he wanted to make sure they couldn't ignore it this time. He took photos of the car, the purse, and the DMV documents. He was ready to break the loop. The Uncle Marcus narrative was about to fall apart, and the real predator was about to find out that the truth has a way of showing up at the most mundane places, even the DMV. While the police were busy celebrating their confession and the local papers were printing Marcus Robinson's mugshot as the face of evil, Matt Sauer was just getting started. He had a natural instinct for the gaps in a story, the places where the narrative didn't quite fit the physics of the world. He moved into a small motel room on the edge of town, turning it into a war room. He taped the crime scene photos to the wall and laid out the police reports, but his main focus was a map of Pascagoula and a digital stopwatch. He didn't care what Marcus had said after 10 hours of being screamed at. He wanted to know what the clock said. He began by recreating the police's proposed timeline. According to the official theory, Marcus had gone to Maya's house around 4:45 p.m. to ask for money. A struggle ensued, and the murder happened at approximately 5 p.m. The neighbors had reported hearing a muffled thump and a scream right around that time. The police argued that Marcus then fled, drove home, and later went to the gas station. It sounded plausible on paper, but Sauer noticed a major problem. The gas station security footage showed Marcus's truck pulling into the lot at 5:02 p.m. Sauer got into his own car at exactly 5 p.m. on a Tuesday, mimicking the traffic conditions of the day of the murder. He drove from Maya's house to the gas station. Even with the pedal to the metal and blowing through 2 yellow lights, it took him 7 minutes and 40 seconds. To make the 5:02 p.m. timestamp at the gas station, Marcus would have had to murder Maya, clean himself up, run to his truck, and teleport through 3 miles of suburban traffic in less than 2 minutes. It was a physical impossibility. He brought this to the attention of the lead prosecutor, a man named Henderson who had already built his re-election campaign around this open and shut case. Henderson barely looked up from his desk. "People speed, Matt," he said with a dismissive wave. "Maybe his watch was wrong. Maybe the gas station camera is off. We have a confession. A confession beats a stopwatch every day of the week." Sauer walked out of the office, feeling the cold weight of the injustice. The system wasn't looking for the truth. It was looking for a win. He knew that to save Marcus, he couldn't just prove he wasn't there. He had to find the person who was. He went back to the blue Cadillac. He had the name Chris Williams from the DMV records. Yes, but Williams had vanished from his last known address in Columbus. Sauer started digging into Williams' history. He discovered that Williams wasn't just some random drifter. He had played in a garage band with Maya's ex-husband years ago. He knew the house. He knew the family. And he knew that Maya's ex-husband often kept large amounts of cash from his landscaping business in a coffee tin in the pantry. The curiosity loop deepened when Sauer looked at Chris Williams' criminal record. He had been arrested 3 times for smash-and-grab robberies, and every single time he had used a stolen car that he dumped within 48 hours. Williams wasn't a mastermind. He was a desperate, high-functioning addict. Sauer realized that the murder likely wasn't a planned execution. It was a robbery gone wrong. Williams had gone for the coffee tin. Maya had surprised him, and in a crack-fueled panic, he had used the nearest weapon, a kitchen knife, to silence her. Sauer spent the next week playing detective in the shadows. He visited the halfway house where Williams had stayed. He talked to a guy in the smoking area named Twitchy Pete, slipping him a $20 bill. Pete remembered Chris. He remembered him bragging about a big score that was going to get him out of Ohio. Pete also mentioned that Chris had a girlfriend in a nearby town called Springfield, a woman named Vanessa who worked at a late-night laundromat. The pacing of the hunt was slow and methodical. Sauer spent 3 nights sitting in his car outside that laundromat, the smell of bleach and cheap detergent heavy in the air. On the 4th night, a beat-up silver sedan pulled into the lot. A man stepped out who matched Chris Williams' description perfectly. Tall, gaunt, with eyes that darted around like a trapped animal. Sauer didn't move. He watched Williams walk inside and hand a wad of cash to the woman behind the counter. They shared a cigarette in the doorway, their whispers lost in the hum of the washing machines. Sauer knew he couldn't just grab him. He needed the forensic link. He remembered the woman in Columbus who had bought the blue Cadillac. She had mentioned a bag left in the trunk. Sauer drove back to Columbus that night, his headlights cutting through the dark Ohio countryside. He met the woman again and took custody of the bag. Inside, he found something that made his blood run cold. It wasn't just Maya's purse. Tucked into a side pocket was a small, blood-stained handkerchief. This was the momentum he needed. He didn't go back to the local police. He knew they were too invested in Marcus's guilt to listen. Instead, he went to the State Bureau of Investigation. He presented the DMV records, the impossible timeline, the witness from the laundromat, and the physical evidence from the trunk. The state agents were more objective. They took the handkerchief and ran a rush DNA test. While the lab worked, the tension in Pascala was reaching a breaking point. Marcus's trial date was set, and the local news was running stories about the monster in our midst. Clara was receiving threatening phone calls at home. People were throwing trash onto her lawn. The bystander gossip had turned into a full-blown witch hunt. Sauer visited Marcus in jail. The man looked like a shell of himself. He had stopped eating, and his eyes were sunken and dull. "Ah, they're going to kill me for something I didn't do, aren't they?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sauer didn't lie. "They're trying to," he said. "But the clock doesn't lie, Marcus. We're almost there." The release of tension came on a Tuesday morning. The DNA results from the handkerchief were a perfect match for Chris Williams. More importantly, they found a secondary DNA profile on the handle of the knife from the crime scene that also matched Williams. The Uncle Marcus confession was officially exposed as a product of coercion and exhaustion. The state agents moved in on the laundromat in Springfield that afternoon. Williams didn't even put up a fight. He was high when they took him down, babbling about a blue car and a lady who wouldn't stop screaming. The revelation hit the Pascala PD like a bombshell. Detective Miller was forced to hold a press conference, his face even more crumpled than usual. He had to admit that they had refined their investigation and that all charges against Marcus Robinson were being dropped. He didn't apologize. He didn't mention the 10-hour interrogation or the stopwatch. He just called it a victory for the justice system. The emotional weight of the moment Marcus walked out of those jail doors was staggering. Clara was there, sobbing as she threw her arms around her brother. Marcus didn't look like a man who had won. He looked like a man who had been through a war. He stood on the sidewalk for a long time, just breathing the air, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He had his life back, but the scars of the injustice were permanent. But Sauer wasn't done. He knew that the real story wasn't just about catching a killer. It was about how easily a life can be stolen by a system that values speed over accuracy. He looked at the DMV records one last time. A simple piece of paperwork, a handwritten name on a title transfer, had done what 20 detectives hadn't. It had told the truth. The true legacy of Maya Vance wasn't the tragedy in her kitchen, but the reminder that even in the darkest moments, the truth is out there, waiting to be found in the most mundane places. The aftermath of a wrongful conviction doesn't look like a celebration. It looks like a slow, painful awakening from a fever dream. When Marcus Robinson stepped out into the crisp Ohio air, the cameras flashed and the reporters shouted, but he didn't hear them. He was looking at his hands, or still shaking from the memory of the cold steel table in the interrogation room. He was free, but the world he returned to was fractured. The town of Pascala didn't offer a collective apology. Instead, there was a heavy, awkward silence. The kind that follows a massive public mistake that everyone was complicit in making. Matt Sauer watched from the edge of the crowd, leaning against his car with a sense of grim satisfaction. He had done his job, but the injustice of the last year weighed on him. He knew that catching Chris Williams was only half the battle. The other half was making sure the system that allowed an innocent man to be buried alive was held to account. He watched as Clara led Marcus to her car, shielding him from the microphones. They drove away, leaving the police station behind. But the legacy of those 10 hours in the dark would follow Marcus for the rest of his life. The trial of Chris Williams was a stark contrast to the rush to judgment that had nearly killed Marcus. With the DNA evidence from the floral print purse and the blood-stained handkerchief, the prosecution's case was airtight. The state agents had done what the local police wouldn't. They followed the trail of the blue Cadillac back to its source. It turned out that Williams had been high on crack the night of the murder, looking for a quick score to fund his next hit. He had known about the coffee tin in the pantry from his days playing music with Maya's ex-husband. He thought the house would be empty. When Maya walked in on him, the situation escalated into a violent drug-fueled panic. In the courtroom, Williams sat slumped in his chair, his eyes glazed and vacant. He didn't look like a mastermind. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out by his own choices. When the verdict came down, guilty on all counts, there were no cheers. Maya's family sat in the front row, their grief still raw and jagged. For them, there was no real closure, only the cold comfort of knowing the right man was behind bars. Chris Williams was sentenced to 20 years to life for murder, with an additional 8 years for aggravated robbery and escaping from the halfway house. But the true revelation of the case didn't happen in the courtroom. It happened a week later when Matt Sauer went back to Maya's house one last time. He found little Leo playing in the backyard with his grandmother. The boy looked older, his face losing some of that toddler softness. Sauer sat on the back porch and watched him for a while. He realized then the true tragedy of the Uncle Marcus accusation. Leo hadn't lied. He had told the truth in the only way a 4-year-old knows how. In the chaotic moments after the murder, as Chris Williams fled the scene in the blue Cadillac, Leo had been alone in that house with his mother's body. He was terrified, submerged in a silence that was too big for his small heart. When the social worker asked him who was there, he didn't name the stranger who had hurt his mother. He named the person he loved most. He named the person he wanted to come through that door and pick him up. The system had taken a child's plea for comfort and twisted it into a weapon of destruction. It was a failure of empathy that almost led to a second tragedy. The impact of the case rippled through Pascala for years. Detective Miller was quietly moved to a desk job, his reputation as a closer permanently tarnished. The department was forced to implement new protocols for child witnesses and recorded interrogations. But for Marcus Robinson, the change was more personal. He didn't just go back to his old life, he rebuilt a new one. He stopped drinking, he returned to work, and he became a vocal advocate for the wrongly accused. He sued the city of Pascala for $3 million in damages, not for the money, but to make sure the cost of their tunnel vision was high enough that they would never forget it. The curiosity loop that had driven the investigation finally closed on a quiet afternoon at the DMV. Sauer had gone back to settle some paperwork, and as he sat in the plastic chair waiting for his number to be called, he saw a young mother with a toddler. The child was pointing at a photo on a poster, babbling a name that only the mother understood. It reminded him that behind every file, every title transfer, and every bureaucratic record, there is a human story. Sometimes those stories are lost in the noise, but they are always there, waiting for someone to look at the clock and see the truth. The story of Maya Vance and Marcus Robinson is a reminder that the truth is often found in the most mundane places. It wasn't a high-speed chase or a brilliant legal maneuver that saved an innocent man. It was a handwritten name on a piece of paper in a dusty office. It was a stopwatch and a map. It was the refusal to accept a convenient lie when a difficult truth was waiting to be found. Whereas Marcus stood in his own kitchen months later, preparing a meal for Leo and Clara, the air was light. The ticking of the clock was no longer a countdown to disaster, but a steady, rhythmic reminder of the time they had reclaimed. The injustice was behind them. The real killer was in a cell, and for the first time in a very long time, the name Uncle Marcus was spoken with nothing but love. If this story about the thin line between justice and a mistake made you look twice at the systems we trust, don't let the conversation end here. There are countless stories where the truth is hiding in plain sight, just waiting for the right person to look at the clock. Do us a favor. Ask the like button if you can borrow their car, but when you return it, make sure the DMV records are updated. Subscribe to the channel and join our community so you never miss a deep dive into the strange, dark, and mysterious. Your support keeps these investigations moving forward. Disclaimer. The following program is provided for entertainment and educational purposes only. While this script is modeled after the documented wrongful conviction of Nick Robinson and the subsequent investigation into the murder of Rhonda Bogs, Maya Vance in our narrative, certain elements, character micro-movements, and atmospheric details have been dramatized to enhance the storytelling experience. This content should not be used as a substitute for professional legal advice or official investigative reports. If you are involved in a legal matter or have information regarding a crime, please contact a qualified attorney or your local law enforcement agency.